Don't go in there. It's a trap.
The black spy pinned the Korean billionaire to the floor to protect him. She walked out into the Seoul night toward him, her mind racing through various possibilities. Alicia came to Seoul with one goal: catch the Korean mafia. Now, she was about to destroy everything she had worked for. So, welcome back. This isn't the usual story we give you. It has more action, love, and betrayal than you're used to. Stay with us, because we are going to make this already thrilling story even more intense. If this story has your heart racing already, smash that subscribe button and hit that notification bell, because we drop thrilling, intense stories like this every single week, and you do not want to miss out. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments section below. Also, if Alicia's journey has you dreaming of your own Korean adventure, we've got exactly what you need. Click the link in the description to grab your copy of the Seoul Travel Guide 2026. It is your ultimate step-by-step guide to experiencing Seoul on your own terms. From the best K-drama filming locations and aesthetic cafes to the top skincare spots and black hair salons. Now, let's go back to the very beginning, back to Los Angeles, where Alicia's story truly started. Alicia Marshall was not just a detective. She was an unstoppable force of nature within the sprawling grid of the Los Angeles Police Department. When she cleared impossibly difficult cases, no one was surprised. Everyone expected absolute greatness from her, and she delivered it without fail. It was woven into her DNA. After all, she was the only child of Donald Marshall. Her father, Donald, was a handsome, Afro-Latino man in the precinct, a man whose presence commanded respect the moment he walked into a room. He had married the most breathtakingly beautiful Black American woman, Stella. They were the picture of absolute perfection, a love story people envied until cancer brutally and unapologetically tore Stella away from her family when Alicia was only 6 years old. Alicia still vividly remembered the sterile smell of bleach and wilting flowers in the hospice room. Almost immediately after the funeral, her only present parent became her entire world, her anchor, and her sole role model. Her father was a living legend. He had been one of the best police officers and detectives in all of Georgia for 15 years, long before he and Stella had even had Alicia. But after Stella died, their house felt entirely too quiet. The silence was deafening. Home didn't feel like home to Alicia and Donald anymore. Every corner held a memory that hurt too much to look at. So, they packed up their immense grief and moved across the country to Los Angeles, where Donald had to build his legendary reputation all over again from the absolute beginning. For 6 years, Alicia watched her father grow into one of the best detectives Los Angeles had ever seen, and she wanted to be exactly like him. She was fiercely proud of his journey. She would sit at his oversized wooden desk, inhaling the comforting scent of his old leather jacket and stale precinct coffee, and whenever he asked what she wanted to be in the future, her answer never changed. "I want to be like you, Daddy," little Alicia always said, her eyes shining with admiration. She didn't really know what being like him meant yet, the dark things he had to see and do, but she knew with absolute certainty that she wanted to learn how to fight, how to use a gun, how to save lives, and best of all, how to catch criminals. By the time she was 16, Donald was personally training his daughter. She always wanted to learn, possessing a relentless, insatiable hunger for justice, so he decided there was no one better to train her than him. He taught her how to throw a punch, how to clear a room, and how to read a liar's eyes. Now, she truly knew who her father was. She understood how incredibly risky his job was, the shadow of death that followed him, and why everyone in the city respected him. She knew that every case had an answer, if you looked hard enough. Most importantly, she knew that his job required heavy, painful sacrifice. Sometimes, he taught her with a grim look in his eyes. He had to sacrifice the few to save the many. It was the brutal mathematics of saving lives. Just when she was beginning to really understand her father and the immense, crushing weight he carried, the phone rang. It was late. She picked it up and received a call from his detective office. The trembling words of the captain shattered her universe into a million irreparable pieces. She was told that he had died. That was when the whole world spun wildly out of control for Alicia. The ground vanished from beneath her feet, leaving her falling into an endless abyss of grief. She was now an orphan. Her father had died in a highly classified, incredibly dangerous mission where he was caught by enemies. Donald had saved 2 people before he lost his life. He had died a hero, taking bullets meant for others. But that bravery didn't make the suffocating grief hurt any less. It only made the empty house feel colder. She had no family left, Donald had only one sibling, his brother Martin, but Donald didn't like him at all. In 16 years, Alicia hadn't even seen her uncle in person, so she knew her father had kept his distance. But as the law stood, he was the only blood relative she had left in the world. On the day of her father's burial, the air was thick, gray, and bitterly cold. She finally met her Uncle Martin, and he was the exact opposite of his brother, in every conceivable way. He looked like he smoked and drank heavily, his eyes were bloodshot, and his clothes were wrinkled and disheveled. He didn't look put together, proud, or strong, like her father. The thought of living with a man like him, of being under his care, was utterly terrifying. "Sorry for your loss, Alicia," a deep, gentle, gravelly voice said from behind her. Alicia, whose eyes were swollen and red from the endless stream of tears, turned back to see a white man who had a severe, jagged scar slashing across his face. He should have looked scary, intimidating even, but somehow he was homely. He had profound kindness and deep, genuine pity in his eyes. "Thank you," Alicia managed to mutter, with the remaining strength she had left in her fragile, exhausted body. He gave her a clean, pressed handkerchief for her tears, and they stood by the fresh earth of her father's grave and talked for a while. She found out that he was a detective, just like her father, and that the horrific scar on his face had been the parting gift that the fatal mission had given him. Alicia heard him talk about her father with so much profound love and respect, and she found out the agonizing truth. Donald had sacrificed the few, which was himself, to save the many, which was two of his colleagues, including the scarred man standing in front of her. Her heart broke all over again, fracturing pieces that were already shattered. Finally, she recognized something about her father's philosophy she didn't agree with. She believed she didn't have to sacrifice anyone to save the many. Everyone should be safe. Everyone should be given the opportunity to go back to their families alive. No one should be left behind to bleed out in the dark. "Alicia, who's this?" Martin suddenly barked, stepping up and shooting Tim a stern, greedy look while smelling of stale liquor. "I'm Tim," he said calmly, extending his hand to Martin, who gave him a reluctant, limp, and dismissive shake. "I was telling Alicia that my home is hers. Her father was my family, and she is my family too." Tim turned his warm eyes back to Alicia. He told her about how Donald used to talk about her constantly, how she wanted to be a detective, and he told her how the police team was ready to fund her dream. He promised her she never had to feel lonely again. Tim and his wife Chloe didn't have a child of their own, so he was ready, willing, and eager to make her his own child. "This is my brother's daughter. She'll be living with me," Martin said coldly, stepping forward, as if to claim a piece of property. Martin didn't really care about Alicia. He didn't care about her grief. All he knew was that her late brother would definitely have a massive government grant, a pension, and death benefits for his services rendered to the U.S., and it would all be given to Alicia. Since Alicia wasn't of age yet, he'd have full, unrestricted access to the money as her legal caregiver. Alicia looked at the man reeking of smoke, her face hardening into a mask of pure martial steel. "With all due respect, Uncle, this is the first time in my life I'm seeing you. If my dad avoided you, then I'll be avoiding you too. I'm staying with Mr. Tim," Alicia said calmly, leaving no room for debate. Martin wasn't going to have it. He opened his mouth to shout, but when he looked at Tim's scarred face and realized the sheer insurmountable cost of fighting an entire armed police department in court for custody, he decided that maybe the grant wasn't worth the trouble. He turned and walked away. Alicia was sponsored through all of her police studies. By 20, she was a prodigy. She had the greatest coaches and tactical teachers in the state. Her father was the first to teach her, but since then she'd learned a whole lot, which included the unshakable fact that you didn't need to sacrifice the few to save the many. That used to be Donald's motto, but her own motto was that there didn't need to be a sacrifice. Everyone is important. The grant money was left completely untouched for Alicia for any extra expenses she wanted, because Tim happily and proudly sorted most of them. She practiced harder, fought longer, and studied deeper than the average 20-year-old. She went on highly dangerous missions with Tim sometimes, but only after she had fought bitterly with him about no longer being a child needing protection. She interned with Tim and demanded he treat her like more than an intern, and since Tim loved her so much, he always obliged, pushing her to her absolute limits. By 26, Alicia was a well-trained, highly lethal detective, and all of Los Angeles knew her name. She had the kind of legendary track record only Donald could have dreamed of. She had closed more complex cases than she could count in her 4 years of being an official detective, and she was better, faster, and smarter than most detectives in her grade. She was easily promoted all the time. People would initially whisper that it was because of her father, Tim, who made it clear to everyone that Alicia was his daughter. But for 3 years, Tim had been happily retired, and Alicia still was thriving, breaking records. So everyone who used to blame her success on her connections quickly and permanently stopped talking. "Guess who just got promoted?" Alicia said, beaming as she headed toward the dining table of her mom and dad, Tim and Chloe. She had moved out of their house 4 years ago to get her own place, but she always stayed there at least 3 times a week. She knew it was excessive, but they reminded her of Donald and Stella, the pure love and happiness her dead parents shared, and most especially, the deep, unwavering love they had for her. "Not again?" Tim said, his face breaking into a huge smile as he got up to hug Alicia tightly. This was her 3rd promotion this year, and at this rate, they would start giving her much heavier, more dangerous, undercover tasks. Tim, though incredibly proud of the woman Alicia had become, was silently terrified for her. He was scared to his core that she'd fall victim to exactly what had happened to his best friend. And weeks later, Tim's darkest fears finally came true. Alicia came to the family house. Tim and Chloe assumed it was one of the normal check-ins, a quiet evening of dinner and laughs. But this check-in came with news that made Tim's heart skip a terrifying beat. "I'm going on a mission in Seoul." Tim looked at her in absolute, paralyzing fear. He hated telling her he was scared for her because she always interpreted it as him thinking she wasn't good enough or that she needed a babysitter. But her father was good, the best, and he was the one who didn't live long enough to retire. "Do you have to take this mission? Why not stay in LA?" Tim finally said, his voice laced with heavy anxiety. As usual, Alicia shot him a stern, unyielding look, which he was prepared for, because he wasn't ready to lose the only physical reminder of the man who had saved his life. "Tim, it's a top-secret and high-profile mission. If I pull this off, everyone will know my name, and I just want to be like Dad," Alicia said calmly, her eyes burning with ambition. "I don't want you to be like Donald, Alicia. I want you to be like Alicia, alive and well." Chloe stayed quiet, looking down at her hands, because she knew conversations like this rarely ended well, and picking a side was not the best thing. Because when Tim and Alicia fought fiercely about something, and you involved yourself, they'd eventually use you as the bridge to make up. After intense, tearful arguing, Alicia made it abundantly clear that this was not an opportunity she would give up. Tim had to listen. He had to let her fly, because he didn't want a permanent, emotional rift between him and his daughter. The mission was monumental. It was for Alicia to get to the absolute root of a ruthless, untouchable drug trafficking mafia boss called Sang-woo Kim, who the authorities had traced to Seoul. Because Seoul wasn't in the American territory, they couldn't just kick down doors. They needed a ghost spy to completely infiltrate the empire. They knew only so much, which was that Sang-woo was bringing massive shipments of illegal drugs into America, but they had absolutely no idea who his distributor was. The mission for Alicia was to infiltrate his inner circle, find out who was bringing the drugs to America, find out exactly how it even gets to America, past customs, and get undisputed, ironclad proof that Sang-woo was a drug dealer. Then, and only then, could they have enough evidence to go across the border to arrest him on grounds that he was pushing drugs on American soil. The perfect way to get someone inside had finally arrived. Word came in through dark channels that Sang-woo Kim desperately needed a new personal bodyguard. He never hired Korean bodyguards as his personal detail because he didn't need anyone around him who could understand his illicit deals and testify against him. The last bodyguard was a Portuguese man who had mysteriously and violently died some weeks ago. Now, he needed another, highly skilled bodyguard. When the LAPD detectives heard that, they saw it as a perfect, golden way to infiltrate the mafia's entire business. Alicia packed her bags and prepared her mind for Seoul. She had never been to Seoul before, and she believed that this would both be a good experience and a life-changing task in her career. She thought about the strict, non-negotiable instruction her boss had given her in the briefing room. Under no circumstances are you to expose yourself to any of them. Alicia saw it as an easy task as she thought about it while she packed her tactical gear. There was basically no way she'd even give anything away. She couldn't understand a lick of Korean, so all the conversation would be entirely strange to her, meaning her face would not have to change or react during any violent or implicating conversation, which was going to save her life. However, her earring would have a high-tech microphone that would be sending the audio conversation straight to her team in America, and she'd be able to access every translated piece of information after the fact. Her genuine ignorance with the Korean language was going to be what will make this a success. Most especially considering the fact that she was a believer of immediate actions, so not knowing what the conversation is in real time was the best thing for her to maintain her blank cover. Alicia got on a plane to Seoul after she'd gone to see Tim and Chloe and had told them a long, tearful goodbye. She promised it was going to be a short mission, just a quick intelligence grab, and she was going to be back as soon as she was done with the mission. When Alicia landed in Seoul, the atmosphere was incredibly beautiful and simply everything she'd thought of. The neon lights, the crisp air, the endless sea of moving people. She was taking everything in, marveling at the architecture, when a man walked hard right into her shoulder, which immediately pissed her off, jarring her from her thoughts. "You have eyes. Watch it," Alicia snapped, coldly, without looking back as she kept walking. He had ruined the peaceful experience she was having seconds ago. He stopped and looked at her face when she snapped at him and was in complete, paralyzing awe. She was the most beautiful black-skinned girl he had ever seen, and even with the fierce, blazing irritation on her face, she still looked like a goddess, walked straight out of a painting. He watched her walk away from him, her posture perfect, and could feel a smile form on his lips. It was actually his fault that he walked into her. He was so utterly distracted, looking for his fiancée, Yuri, who was finally coming home. He kept staring at the black girl, who never cared to stare back, until she disappeared into the crowded terminal, and he just looked on in awe. "What's wrong?" The familiar question brought Doha back to reality as he realized that the Yuri he had been looking for had now found him. He brought her into a tight, desperate hug. His relationship had been incredibly shaky since Yuri had gotten an admission into a college far away from Seoul. It seemed as though the massive physical distance had severely strained the emotional relationship. But he knew he loved Yuri. He had loved her for 4 years, and he believed at some point, deep down, Yuri loved him too. "Nothing is wrong. I thought I saw someone I knew, but it's nothing," Doha said, still hugging his fiancée and trying to forcibly remove the lingering thought of the striking black girl he had just crashed into. Alicia stepped out of the airport, and Seoul hit her instantly. The beauty she'd expected was nothing compared to actually being in it. Alicia was a detective in skill, but a traveler at heart, another thing she had inherited from Donald. She couldn't wait for the parts of her job that involved missions outside America. She had many things she'd love to do as a tourist, but she was here on a deadly mission. She found her way to Sang-woo Kim's mansion on the outskirts of the city. It was safe to say the most evil people had the most money in the world, because his mansion was no longer a mansion. You could mistake it for a massive, sprawling football stadium. It screamed all the luxury that it could possibly hold, with high walls and armed men, and almost immediately, Alicia knew that this mission was going to be exceptionally dangerous. Because Sang-woo wasn't just any man. He was a man that had built mansions from just being pure evil. Alicia was met with his house manager, and she was told Sang-woo would come down soon. When Alicia saw Sang-woo walk down the grand stairs, the raw look on her face gave her internal shock away. Sang-woo noticed and gave a brief, charming, almost boyish smile. "I know, I get that a lot," he said in perfect English, moving towards an opulent leather chair. He saw Alicia's raw expression and immediately took a liking to her. It seemed like he finally got a bodyguard he'd actually like to be around. She wasn't the average female bodyguard who came off more as hyper-masculine and stiff. Her femininity was top-notch, which he knew would be very useful for him in the future to disarm his enemies. Alicia immediately rearranged her facial expression into a mask of stone, but the shock was still there. Her team knew information about him, but no one really had a picture of him. Almost all the info they had about him was hearsay from terrified informants, just as they had heard that he needed a bodyguard. Alicia had expected him to look mean, scarred, and old, but he was the exact opposite. He looked 35 years old at most, and had the calmest, most serene look, and to make it worse, he was undeniably very handsome. She hated that she even thought that, because she knew he was a world-renowned mafia boss that had brutally killed a lot of people, but she couldn't help but wonder how people could be so terrified of an innocent-looking mafia boss. Sang-woo assessed Alicia too, sharp eyes and a face that looked designed by God. But it wasn't just her looks that made him decide to hire her on the spot. It was her unparalleled ability to notice things. "Someone is upstairs. Did you leave someone there?" Alicia said abruptly, immediately pulling out her pistol and aiming it directly at the shadows on the second-floor balcony. Sang-woo smiled deeply, a genuine look of impressive amusement. He knew she wasn't just a pretty face. He had explicitly told his chef to go upstairs and peep over the railing 3 times, and if she didn't notice, she wasn't observant enough to keep him alive. But she didn't just notice. She equally brought out a weapon immediately, ready to fire. The chef told him later, trembling, that he only peeped twice before she had noticed. "Stephanie Jones, it's a pleasure to work with you," Sang-woo said, stretching his hand to her. Anita's LAPD team had already designed a whole different identity for her, completely scrubbing Alicia Marshall from existence, which would help lead suspicions to a place where Anita isn't caught if things went south. Because this was an incredibly risky job. Anita was absolutely perfect for Sang-woo, who was always in one sort of danger or the other from rival gangs, and desperately needed someone that would be very alert. But Alicia was a woman of little words, which was both highly efficient, but also something that made Sang-woo think about her a lot. Her absolute silence was a wall he wanted to break, but had been unable to break it. Alicia followed Sang-woo everywhere, like a lethal shadow, and they used Korean all around her, unless he wanted to give her a direct instruction, or for some reason. He wanted to ask the quiet bodyguard a personal question. He was beginning to feel something deep for the American bodyguard, who never had anything to say. On the other end of Seoul, Doha and Yuri's relationship was fracturing under the weight of an unspoken secret. Doha had been noticing drastic, painful changes in Yuri ever since she started her schooling in the United States. It started with the little things, turning her phone screen away when it buzzed, stepping out onto the balcony to take hushed calls. Then came the late nights, staying out for hours, and sometimes not even coming home to sleep at all. Whenever he tried to talk to her, desperate for simple reassurance, she spun it back on him, making him feel crazy, paranoid, and excessively controlling. But it was all manipulation. When she called him paranoid, Yuri knew his instincts were right. She was hiding a massive double life. She was working for Sang-woo. Sang-woo had been a family friend of the Sung family for years, and Yuri had harbored a deep, obsessive love for him for just as long. But Sang-woo was a man built of ice and ambition, focused entirely on expanding his dark empire, and entirely uninterested in romance. Yuri knew she had to prove her ultimate worth to get his attention. 2 years ago, when she got her admission to study in the US, she saw her golden opportunity. She approached Sang-woo and offered to use her student status to run his drugs and expand his territory overseas. Finally, she had found a way to sit at the table with the man she obsessed over. Sang-woo, realizing how far her devotion would push her to protect him, agreed to the arrangement. While Yuri played the ruthless cartel distributor in the shadows, Doha was left in the dark, suffering the toxic fallout from the woman he loved. "Where were you?" Doha asked one evening, his voice thick with exhaustion and heartbreak. "Oh, so you're my parent now, Doha?" Yuri snapped angrily, rolling her eyes and walking away to avoid his gaze. Doha had wanted to speak to her calmly about how he felt, to bridge the growing gap between them. He had even shown up at her house with flowers later that same evening, only to find it completely empty. He stayed parked in his car for hours in the dark, staring at her front door, unable to wrap his head around what was really pulling her away from him. They argued as usual the next day, and he left without ever telling her his true feelings, completely unaware of the monsters lurking just out of sight. Alicia and Yuri finally met each other when Yuri came to the mansion to discuss her next course of action when she goes back to school. Alicia stood there in the corner, calm and collected, understanding absolutely nothing in what they were both saying in Korean, but her hidden earring was still getting all the vital video and audio recording. "Why is your personal bodyguard a woman?" Yuri said calmly, looking at Alicia, who stood firmly, with no care in the world, eyes straight ahead. Yuri asked the question purely from deep, burning jealousy. Yuri had noticed that in 30 minutes of talking to Sang-woo, he had taken a lingering, appreciative glance at Alicia no less than 7 times. "She is better than most guys," Sang-woo said with a soft, genuine smile that intensely irritated Yuri. She'd been putting herself in federal danger for years for Sang-woo, only to see him blushing over a mere hired bodyguard. "She doesn't look like she can be trusted," Yuri said bitterly, crossing her arms. Sang-woo shot Alicia a brief nod, and she nodded back blankly. "I trust her," he said firmly, moving away from that conversation to something else he'd rather have. Yuri shot Alicia a venomous, jealous glare, and poor Alicia had no idea what they were talking about, at least not until she got home to her safe house, locked the doors, and listened to the translated conversation. She always played the daily recording, most especially of suspicious times in the day where she felt a conversation implicated Sang-woo. And while she listened to the playback, She finally noticed something that she'd not cared about in a while. The mafia boss probably had something for her. The way he spoke about her was too warm to be nothing. She planned on using that advantage immediately, drawing him in, especially now that Yuri, who obviously didn't like her, was back in the country. Yuri and Alicia didn't really agree on things. Yuri made sure to blame Alicia for every minor inconvenience in the house, trying to get her fired. But Alicia, knowing very well that Sangwoo felt something for her, would just meet him with everything and watch him furiously warn Yuri for being too much. "She's my personal bodyguard, not yours, Yuri," he scolded loudly, his voice echoing off the marble floors after he saw Yuri commanding Alicia to wipe the tables like a servant. Yuri knew there were maids, but she wanted to show Alicia her place. Sangwoo immediately scolded Yuri and asked her to leave, which shocked and completely broke her heart. She came back to Doha, who was always been there, and cried hysterically. Doha had been fighting the thought that there was something Yuri was doing that wasn't adding up, but today confirmed it. He asked her why she was crying, but she lied through her teeth and just told him something about her dad not being fair to her. He consoled her because he cared about what was left of the relationship. But he decided it was high time he stopped asking her for the truth and simply found it himself. He placed a microscopic tracker in her phone pouch when she was sleeping. He needed to know once and for all what she was really doing. The next day, Doha's logistics manager called him to tell him something was terribly off about the goods they shipped off the last 2 weeks. "What was wrong? Was it damaged?" Doha asked, rubbing his temples. "No, but it seemed contaminated by drugs." Those words brought Doha back in pure, icy shock. How could it be contaminated by drugs? He questioned his manager intensely, as an information like this could taint his good name, destroy his legacy, and ruin his empire. How was it even possible? What Doha didn't know was that infidelity was the one thing Yuri wasn't doing, but every other damage was being done. He had a well-reputable transport company in Seoul, worth billions, and Yuri had access to that company. Not the full access, but she could also transport what she needed when she needed to, and recently, she had been needing to a lot. Doha didn't think anything of it, and still, right now, he wouldn't have considered that she had brutally taken advantage of the access he gave her. Instead, he suspected every other person working for him. After the call, he spoke with Yuri about how he suspected his team was trying to ruin his business by pushing drugs alongside the materials. "Oh my, I didn't think they'd do that," Yuri yelled sympathetically, playing the perfect fiancé. But she got the message instantly and knew it was time to take a break from using his transport company. Doha, on the other hand, called for a massive emergency meeting and started to threaten every single person on his team, from the one that was supposed to check the packaging to the distribution. This was a case of not paying attention, and this little thing could affect the stellar reputation of his company. But something caught his attention during the meeting as he stared at his phone under the desk and saw Yuri was out, and the direction didn't look like his house or her parents. The dot was moving fast. He concluded the meeting immediately. He watched the blinking dot until she stopped at a location he didn't recognize. Then it occurred to him, she was probably cheating. He sent the address to his private investigator, who came back with a name, Sangwoo Kim. The private investigator told him about Sangwoo Kim and how his movements were sketchy, though nothing was ever pinned on him. Doha listened quietly while his mind ran through horrifying questions about what was really going on with Yuri. Alicia, meanwhile, was still protecting Sangwoo while actively spying on him. She could see that he had eased up with her. Sometimes he told her things in English, breaking his own rules. "You seem more disturbed about your enemies than the law," she said, while they sat in the dim lounge playing chess. They had become closer in 4 months, and even Yuri noticed. As much as she hated it, there was nothing she could do. Sangwoo was stuck in the agonizing dilemma of letting Alicia know how he felt and losing her as a trusted bodyguard. "That's because in this city I've managed to fool the law with my looks, and those same looks make other mafia see me as an easy target," he said, smiling warmly as he moved a knight across the board. He seemed warmer in person, but that wasn't what brought Alicia here. He had made thousands of people in the US overdose because he was trying to make money. She didn't care if he was warm or not. They continued to talk while they played, Alicia keeping her mask perfectly intact. Yuri noticed the silence first. For weeks, Doha had been suffocating her with questions and pleas for her time, but suddenly, the texts stopped. The complaints about her absence vanished. The quiet was sharp and unnerving. Deciding it was time to see what was wrong, she drove to his house. But the man who opened the door wasn't the anxious fiancé she knew. He was a wall of ice. He didn't offer a hug or a greeting. Instead, he walked away, leaving her to follow him into the living room, where he dropped a tablet onto the glass coffee table. "You're cheating on me with a mafia boss, Yuri," Doha said. His voice was terrifyingly hollow, stripped of its usual warmth. "You know exactly how I feel about illegal things." Yuri froze. Panic flared in her chest, but Yuri was a survivor. She widened her eyes, instantly summoning a look of perfect, shattered innocence. "I didn't know he was mafia," she gasped, her voice trembling. "He's a family friend, Doha. All of these are lies. And what do you even mean by cheating?" She denied vehemently, staring at him with wide, betrayed eyes. They argued, the tension thick and suffocating. Doha stood his ground, but exhaustion was evident in the bags under his eyes. He had found drugs running through his transport company, and now his fiancée was visiting a known crime boss. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Tell me the truth. Are you working with him?" That was her cue. Yuri let her voice crack. She let tears spill down her cheeks, a masterclass in practiced vulnerability. "Working with whom? I go to school, Doha. In the United States," she cried out, her voice rising in disbelief. "How would I possibly work with anyone in Seoul?" She buried her face in her hands, crying profusely, her shoulders shaking with the force of her manufactured sobs. She knew exactly what she was doing. It was the only way to shift the narrative, to make him feel like an absolute monster for even thinking it. She sobbed through his attempts to speak, accusing him of suffocating her with baseless accusations, crying just enough to ensure his focus shifted entirely from the undeniable tracking evidence to her fragile emotional state. And it worked. Doha watched her break down, and the resolve in his eyes began to crack, replaced by agonizing guilt. The evidence on the tablet was eclipsed by the sight of the woman he loved falling apart. His shoulders slumped. He ran a shaking hand through his hair, the fight draining out of him. He gently told her he wasn't sure what to believe and needed time to figure things out. Sangwoo and Alicia grew dangerously close with time. Alicia constantly justified it to herself, brushing off the shifting tension by calling the closeness a necessary avenue to gather better intel. But she was lying to herself. One way or another, the quiet, beautiful gestures of this ruthless man were slowly chipping away at her armor. The first time he took her somewhere outside the heavily fortified walls of the mansion, it wasn't to a dark warehouse or a clandestine meeting. It was to visit his mother's grave. The Seoul cemetery was quiet, shrouded in a soft mist that carried the scent of damp pine. Alicia stopped a few paces behind him, her posture rigid, trying to rebuild the professional wall between them. "I don't need to follow you to your mother's grave, sir. It's your private time," Alicia said, her voice tight. Every time she found a reason to create distance, he would dismantle it. He looked back at her, the wind tugging at his coat. He told her she was his personal bodyguard, meaning she needed to follow him to personal places. But the absolute truth, hanging unspoken in the crisp air, was much more fragile. He wanted to show her that there were other sides to him. He wanted her to see the boy behind the monster. Standing before the cold stone, the silence of the cemetery wrapping around them, he bared his soul. He told her how a rival mafia syndicate had brutally executed his mother right in front of him. He stared at the grave, his eyes hardening into obsidian, and confessed that since that day, he swore to the earth he would become so terrifyingly dangerous that nothing and no one could ever hurt him again. The second time, he drove her up a winding mountain road to a vantage point overlooking the city. Below them, Seoul spilled out like a breathtaking, limitless ocean of scattered diamonds. The vibrant, electric neon pulsed through the streets, and the Han River snaked through the metropolis, reflecting the golden, sprawling lights of millions of lives. It was mesmerizing. Standing in the cool night breeze, he told her how this hill was the most beautiful place his mother had ever taken him. The tragic irony, he explained, was that it was the only place she could afford, because looking from afar was free. They had been drowning in poverty while staring at wealth. His dad had grown desperate, getting involved in a botched mafia deal that ended both parents' lives. "In a job like this, you're either the boss or you're dead," he murmured. He stared down at the sprawling, glittering lights of Seoul, the neon glow painting the sharp angles of his face. They stood shoulder to shoulder in the dark, the distance between them evaporating, as they talked about everything and nothing. Then, after a while, he decided it was time to show her his deepest secret, someone who was kept completely hidden from the blood and shadows of his dark life. He drove her to an upscale, manicured private school in the heart of the city. "You have a daughter?" Alicia stood frozen, her heart skipping a beat as she watched a bright-eyed girl running across the courtyard toward them. "Yes, I do," Sang-woo said. And for a moment, the mafia boss vanished entirely. A radiant, incredibly genuine smile broke across his face, softening his lethal features as he opened his arms, waiting for Haeon, who was 12 years old, to reach him. But as he held his daughter, he looked over her shoulder at Alicia. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by a chilling calm. His smile faded. "Her mother is dead," he said, simply. He knew that was the exact question hovering in Alicia's mind, so he answered it before she could even ask. Alicia's blood turned to ice. They didn't talk much about it on the ride back. The silence in the car was heavy and suffocating. Alicia stared out the window at the passing city, acutely, painfully aware of the microtransmitter resting in her ear. She knew her LAPD team had heard every single word of that chilling confession, and she knew they were already launching intense, frantic research to see if those 4 words were enough to finally pin a murder charge on the man she was terrified of falling for. Doha began to bleed his own fortune dry, just to buy fragments of the truth. He threw money into the darkest corners of Seoul's underbelly, desperate for answers. There were drugs moving through his pristine transport company, infecting the legacy he had built. He started to piece it together. Yuri wasn't wrong when she claimed innocence about her physical location. She hadn't been in Seoul consistently for 2 years. She was only supposed to be transporting the things she needed in the US for school. But how exactly was the contraband slipping through? Was the woman he loved directly involved, or was she just as clueless a victim as he was? And who was this Sang-woo Kim? Was it his poison pumping through the veins of Doha's company? He needed to find out the truth. He needed to expose it before it destroyed everything. He paid heavily to secure a clandestine meeting with one of Sang-woo's low-level distributors, a man terrified enough to finally talk to Doha. But in Sang-woo's soul, the walls had eyes. One of the mafia's loyal men watched the exchange happen from the shadows and immediately sent word up the chain that a distributor had been compromised. "End it. I don't want him spilling any more secrets," he said to the informant over the phone, his voice as casual as if he were ordering coffee. Alicia was standing right there in the room when he gave the execution order. To her, it was just another string of harsh Korean syllables. She maintained her perfect, unreadable mask, completely oblivious to the death sentence that had just been handed down right in front of her. It wasn't until she went back to her safe house that evening, locked the doors, and listened to the translated playback on her earpiece that her blood ran completely cold. The chilling reality of her situation settled heavily into her bones. She didn't care if Sang-woo was kind to her or if he smiled when she walked into a room. He was a cold-blooded killer. She needed to etch that truth into her mind forever. If she slipped up, if she was exposed as the mole, he wouldn't hesitate for a single second to put a bullet between her eyes. Across the city, Yuri was drowning in a suffocating terror. Doha had grown terrifyingly cold. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by the sharp, analytical gaze of a man doing his own research. She was paralyzed by the fear that he was going to uncover everything. He was getting way too close. Panic clawed at her throat as she realized he always seemed to know her movements. Was he tracking her? The thought sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through her veins. It was too risky. She immediately ditched everything she usually carried, leaving her phone sitting on her kitchen counter, and hailed a cab to Sang-woo's estate. He could literally be tracking anything, and the deeper Doha dug, the more likely he was to drag all of them into a federal prison. That same evening, inside the dimly lit, luxurious expanse of Sang-woo's office, he and Alicia were talking about absolutely nothing, but the air between them was incredibly thick, vibrating with an undeniable, magnetic tension. Even Alicia couldn't believe she was allowing the atmosphere to shift this way, because for a brief, dangerous moment, she forgot the monster sitting across from her. Their chemistry was intoxicating, and a reckless curiosity was getting the better of her training. They were inches apart, the space between them evaporating. They were so close to kissing when the heavy mahogany doors barged open. Yuri stormed in, her face twisted in absolute fury, and immediately started screaming in rapid Korean. Yuri just crashed the moment, and she is absolutely furious. Is Alicia's cover about to be blown by a jealous, plotting woman? Or will Sang-woo's feelings for his new bodyguard protect her? Let us know what you think Sang-woo will do next in the comments below. And if your heart is racing, make sure you smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our weekly stories. Now, let's get right back to the drama and see how Alicia handles Yuri's rage. What is wrong with you? What does she have that I don't? What have I not done for you, Sang-woo? To Alicia, The words were just a chaotic blur of sharp syllables. She couldn't understand a single thing Yuri was saying. But seeing the venomous disgust in Yuri's eyes, Alicia didn't need a translation to know she was the target. She stood there calmly until Yuri turned her rage directly on her and shouted in English, "Get out of here." Alicia didn't flinch. She didn't bother leaving. She simply shifted her gaze to Sangwoo, waiting for her boss's command. Sangwoo didn't even look at Yuri. He kept his eyes on Alicia and calmly, firmly, gestured for her to remain exactly where she was. Humiliated, Yuri switched back to Korean, her voice trembling with panic and rage as she lashed out at Sangwoo. "You know everything is falling apart, right? You think because you ended one snitch that Doha will stop? You're proving to him that he's not wrong. Why is your man all of a sudden putting eyes in my business? We stopped using his transport company," Sangwoo said, sitting down with an irritated sigh. "And when are you going back to school? Haven't you interrupted my life long enough?" Sangwoo continued, his tone cutting. "Interrupted your life, huh? You're falling for another traitor, because that's what you always do. I'm telling you there's something off about her," Yuri shrieked, pointing an angry, violently shaking finger at Alicia. "You're always suspicious, and I've always been right. Don't get this one pregnant first before you realize that she's the enemy." Yuri was still screaming when Sangwoo's demeanor snapped from irritated to lethal. "Enough, Yuri. What do you want?" Sangwoo asked harshly. The mention of his ex-fiancée was a jagged wound he hated to open. Giving the order to kill his own daughter's mother was the hardest thing he had ever had to do, a ghost that haunted him, and he would not let Yuri use it as a weapon. Yuri swallowed hard, reining in her hysterics. "I don't know what Doha knows, but he'll keep searching. He's gone quiet, and it's scary," she said, her voice dropping to a trembling calm. "Does he still trust you?" Sangwoo asked, his mind already calculating the angles. "I don't know." "Okay, let's see then." "What does that mean?" Yuri asked, her eyes narrowing. "You came here telling me he'd expose me. Well, I don't like threats. I'm going to eliminate the threat using you," Sangwoo said, his voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze blood. They began to weave a terrifying web, discussing the cold logistics of murder right in front of Alicia. They talked about how eliminating Doha was actually better for the empire. If something tragic happened to the golden-haired CEO of Quan Transportation, the company's defenses would drop. Since Yuri was his fiancée, she could seamlessly secure a seat at the main table, or even take the main chair, giving the cartel unrestricted, permanent access to his global shipping routes. "But how is he going to sign his company to you?" "You said he doesn't trust you," Sangwoo asked, leaning forward. "I know his signature, and when he's dead, no one can prove that he didn't sign," Yuri said, her voice terrifyingly calm, devoid of any love for the man she slept next to. "As for his lawyer, I have him under control." Yuri turned on her heel and walked out of the office. Sangwoo watched her leave, a dark shadow crossing his face. It was so terrifyingly easy for her to plot the brutal execution of her own lover. This was exactly why he feared her. A woman who could do that could easily plunge a knife into his own back. Little did he know, he was the only person in the world she was stabbing everyone in the back for. To him, she was an untrustworthy snake. To her, she would burn the world to ashes just to make him realize how deeply she loved him. The plan was set in stone. Yuri had the wheels in motion, but there was one crucial, agonizing piece left. She needed to confuse her fiancé one last time. She arrived at Doha's house and found a man who looked like a hollowed-out version of himself. He was sitting on the floor, surrounded by scattered files, looking like a man desperately drowning while searching for answers. "You weren't wrong." The manufactured calmness of Yuri's voice made Doha snap his head back. He hadn't expected her to come back. "I think Sangwoo is a criminal, and I think he somehow finds ways to use people's companies to transport his drugs," she said, letting her voice crack flawlessly as she forced tears to spill over her eyelashes. "I've been talking to him for years I didn't even know. Now I'm scared, Doha," she sobbed, breaking down as Doha scrambled to his feet and pulled her into a tight, protective hug, his heart absolutely breaking for her. "I'm so sorry he played you," he whispered, holding her tightly, guilt eating him alive for ever doubting her. He pulled back to look into her eyes. He told her he had finally traced the exact route Sangwoo might be using to inject drugs into the business. "I just need to talk to someone soon, and I'll finalize it. He's definitely using someone's goods as a means of transporting these drugs." Beneath his embrace, Yuri's heart started to race violently against her ribs. Pure panic spiked through her veins. He was inches away from finding out that she was the one transporting the goods. He looked at her with such calm, profound love, continuing to console her, while inside her mind, she was frantically calculating that they needed to fast-track the execution immediately. The plot was deviously simple. They would stage a fake kidnapping of Yuri, immediately following her Oscar-worthy performance of the terrified fiancé. They would tell Doha she was taken because she had discovered Song-woo was a dealer, making her kidnapping look like the mafia was covering its tracks. They would demand a ransom and tell Doha to come alone. But they knew Doha Kwan. They were certain he wouldn't come completely alone. He would have his armed guards lurking nearby. So, they needed someone to physically bring him inside the trap. When he crossed the threshold, they would transport him to an underground black site and execute him. He was a billionaire CEO. His murder couldn't be a careless street hit. It needed to be buried. Once he was dead and the dust settled, Yuri's parents would conveniently find their traumatized daughter, and every question the police asked would be met with a perfectly rehearsed loophole. Miles away, sitting in the suffocating silence of her apartment, Alicia was listening to the translated audio recording of the entire plot. It made her physically sick to her stomach. This recording was the holy grail, exactly what her LAPD handlers wanted. A full, undeniable confession of international drug trafficking and conspiracy to commit murder. Her team instructed her over the encrypted line to stay completely hidden, keep her cover intact, and wait calmly until they secured the international warrants to raid the compound and arrest Song-woo. That was when the ghost of Donald Marshall filled the room. Her team wanted her to act like a machine. They wanted her to sit back and do nothing while they waited for paperwork to clear, allowing a man whose only offense was loving a truly evil woman to walk into a slaughterhouse. She fiercely rejected the idea of sacrificing the few to save the many. She didn't know how to sit in the dark and let an innocent man get kidnapped and executed. She didn't know how many days the bureaucracy of a warrant would take. They had the evidence of the drug distribution. They had won, but it would cost Doha his life. She didn't know this golden-haired CEO, but she knew, with every fiber of her being, that he had people who loved him, just like she loved her father. The next day was D-Day. Sang-woo approached her, and the look in his eyes was raw and unshielded. "I don't want you as my bodyguard anymore, Stephanie," he said, his voice heavy. Alicia looked at him, her heart skipping a beat in absolute shock. Did she slip up? Did he discover the wire? "I don't like how I look at you as someone that protects me, not someone that is with me," he said softly, closing the space between them. "I think I'm falling for you," he confessed, pulling her gently into his chest. She let him kiss her. She had to. She needed to convince this monster that she loved him too, so he would let his guard down and let her have her way. She needed to be the one they sent to retrieve Yuri's fiancé. As his lips pressed against hers, he had no idea that Yuri was lurking just outside the doorway, watching them from the shadows. He didn't know that Yuri wasn't having it at all, and that in that exact moment, Yuri decided she would do the exact same thing she did to the last woman Sang-woo fell in love with. She wasn't going to sacrifice years of loyalty just for Stephanie to take him away. Her powerful parents would help her cover up any crime, just as they always had. Alicia pulled him away slightly. It took every ounce of her willpower to hide the nausea churning in her stomach. How could she ever feel anything for a man who plotted deception and murder so effortlessly? If she only understood his charming English, she might have fallen, but the horrific Korean translation she listened to every day echoed in her mind. "Let me do this last one with you," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured devotion. "One last rodeo, and I'm all yours," she whispered, hugging him tightly so he couldn't see the cold steel in her eyes. That afternoon, Doha's phone rang. When he answered, the agonizing sound of his fiancée, screaming in terror, filled the background. A distorted, strange voice told him that Yuri had been kidnapped, and that if he ever wanted to see her alive, he had to come alone with 40 million won. Doha froze, his blood turning to ice. It all made horrifying sense. She was in trouble because she had found out about Sang-woo, and now the cartel was silencing her. He didn't waste a single second. He made the calls. He liquidated the 40 million won. He wasn't foolish enough to walk into a cartel den completely alone in case things went south, but he was going to walk through the front door and make the payment himself. "If you see any form of danger, come out quickly. Ensure your eyes are on me at all times," Doha fiercely instructed the elite security team, moving in the shadows behind him. Back at the dungeon, Yuri paced the concrete floor. She knew Doha better than anyone. She knew he was predictable and wouldn't come unescorted. That was exactly why she needed a fresh face to step out of the shadows and bring him in. You, Yuri said, pointing a sharp finger at the black woman. You'd be perfect for it. Sang-woo's jaw clenched, his face tightening with protective instinct, but Alicia's heart started to race with pure adrenaline. This was exactly the opening she had prayed for. She knew the only reason Yuri selected her was the hope that if the exchange went violently wrong, Doha's hidden men would gun Alicia down. Yuri wanted her dead. But Yuri didn't realize that Alicia also wanted to be the person that goes to him. She should be inside with me. She's my bodyguard, Sang-woo started to protest, stepping in front of her. Most people here are men. I can do this. I'm just bringing him in, Alicia said gently, placing a reassuring hand on Sang-woo's chest. She noticed him opening his mouth to argue again. Sang-woo, I can do this. She leaned up and placed a soft peck on his cheek. The gesture melted the mafia boss's heart, but it threw gasoline on the venomous, burning anger inside Yuri. Reluctantly, Sang-woo nodded, allowing her to step out into the danger zone. He is the man with the golden hair, Yuri sneered, as Alicia turned and walked out into the pitch-black night. She stepped out of the heavy dungeon doors and saw a man standing alone in the dim light. Doha's breath hitched. He saw her again, the breathtaking black woman who had snapped at him to watch his step. What in God's name was she doing working for kidnappers? She walked calmly towards him, her eyes locked straight onto his soul. She didn't know this man, but she had already made a vow to the universe that she wasn't going to let him be executed today. Her tactical training fired through her mind. Then, she reached him. Instead of following Yuri's orders, which was to bring him quietly into the slaughterhouse, and instead of following her LAPD team's orders, which was to keep spying and do nothing, she lunged. She grabbed his wrist and, in a blink of an eye, swept his legs, violently pinning him to the concrete floor. Inside the surveillance room, Yuri's eyes widened in sheer, panicked shock. That's not what I asked her to do, Yuri shrieked in complete frustration, slamming the monitors. Is she trying to alert his team? Sang-woo said, though dark suspicion began to bloom in his chest. Out in the cold, Alicia leaned down. Don't go in there. It's a trap, she whispered fiercely into Doha's ear, while using her body weight to keep him pinned. You don't have to be scared. You have men around, right? Signal them to come out, because we need to leave here, right now. My fiancé, Doha choked out, struggling against her grip. Do you want to live, sir? Then call them now, she demanded harshly. Before Doha could even process the command, his hidden men broke from the darkness, weapons raised, moving in with the sole goal of killing the woman, attacking their boss. Leave her for now, Doha yelled calmly, raising a hand. The men lowered their weapons, grabbing them both and hauling them into the back of the armored extraction van before speeding off into the night. Inside the van, Doha stared at her. Talk, now. Alicia looked back at him, her expression completely calm. First of all, you're welcome. And secondly, your fiancé hates you. She was a woman of action, not words. She pulled out her device and hit play on the heavily guarded audio file. The van filled with the crisp, undeniable recording of Yuri and Sang-woo, laughing as they plotted his execution. I risked everything for you. We just need to be low-key. My team is coming, Alicia said to him, watching the color drain entirely from his face as he listened to his life shatter in pure shock. She wants me dead? He whispered, absolutely stunned, his voice breaking. You are engaged to a woman that is in love with another man, Alicia scoffed, shaking her head. She didn't believe in love. She saw it as a massive, fatal distraction. As it was, it had almost made her see a ruthless mafia boss as a lovable person. She sat back, letting him absorb the crushing devastation. Back in the damp, decaying dungeon, the screaming echoed off the walls. Again, Sang-woo. Again, you fall for the wrong woman. I've done everything for you, chose you for who you are, and yet you'll still fall for just about anybody, except me, Yuri shrieked, pacing furiously, while Sang-woo stood frozen, completely stunned by the betrayal. He barely heard her manic screaming. All he could think of were the soft promises Alicia made to him and the warmth of her kiss. She had known she was walking him into a trap, and she had still kissed him with a smile. She had played him like a fool, and a dark, violent rage began to boil in his blood. He was going to make her pay in agony. Yuri snatched a tablet and immediately ran a deep web search on the bodyguard. She searched the Stephanie Jones profile and hit a firewall of empty data. Frustrated, she ran a facial recognition scan on the security footage. She cursed herself for not doing it sooner. Her gut had screamed that the woman was a threat, but she had ignored it, perhaps blinded by the trauma of what had happened to Suman. The screen blinked green. A file loaded. When she saw the real name on the screen, Alicia Marshall, the blood drained from Yuri's face, leaving her ghost pale. "Who linked you up with her?" Yuri asked, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper as she looked at Sangwoo, who was standing in deadly silence. "Who?" "Stephanie," he asked coldly, his mind running through other things. She turned the tablet around for Sangwoo to see. Her name wasn't Stephanie, it was Alicia. The ground fell out from under the mafia boss when he realized the horrifying magnitude of his mistake. She wasn't just a rival spy sent to steal money. She was an undercover detective working directly for the United States police force. He had brought a federal agent into his bed. "We need to leave Seoul right now. It's not safe," Sangwoo said to Yuri, his voice deadpan as he immediately pulled out his encrypted phone and started making calls. It wasn't even 2 hours later when Alicia's burner phone vibrated in her hand. "Did you do anything that jeopardized the plan?" Mika, her handler, asked. His voice was terrifyingly calm. Alicia remained dead quiet on the other end of the line. The silence was all the confirmation Mika needed. He understood exactly what she had done. He told her that the compound was empty. Sangwoo had vanished from Seoul, and now the LAPD had lost their only target. "You had one instruction, Alicia. Just one," Mika said, the disappointment heavy in his voice, before the line clicked dead. Alicia froze, the plastic phone still pressed to her ear. She had sacrificed the mission. Maybe she had made things infinitely worse. Doha looked at her, seeing the impenetrable armor finally shatter into a deeply defeated look. He gently asked her what was really going on. Feeling totally broken, stripped of her badge and her backup, she explained everything that had happened over the last 4 months. She told him who she really was, what she had just thrown away, and exactly why she did it. "I knew this could happen. I just didn't want anybody to be a victim like," she choked out, her voice trembling before she abruptly stopped, completely unable to finish the sentence about her father's sacrifice. The dam broke. Hot tears poured from her eyes, tracing lines down her face as the adrenaline left her body. Doha stared at her, overwhelmed by a profound sense of awe. She was the most beautiful, powerful, and undoubtedly the best woman he had ever met in his life. Without a word, he closed the distance and pulled her into a deep, fiercely protective, and grounding hug, holding her as she cried. "I will help you get them. What do we do now?" he asked calmly, after she had composed herself. "We call my father," she said with complete seriousness in her eyes. This wasn't over. On the other side of Seoul, Yuri was finally getting exactly what she had always wanted, the undivided, full attention of Sangwoo Kim. Finally, she had him all to herself. They were packing up, preparing to leave Seoul and vanish into the shadows until the federal dust settled. But Sangwoo wasn't looking at her. He was on the other end of the room, making dark calls to secure his daughter, and making lethal arrangements to ensure he was going to make Alicia Marshall pay with her life. So tell us, did you enjoy this story? Did Alicia do the right thing by blowing her cover to save Doha? Or should she have followed orders to take down the cartel? Tell us in the comments section because we love to read your thoughts. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell if you haven't yet, because you don't want to miss Part 2. That will come with twists and turns. And if you're ready to explore the neon-lit streets, palaces, and beauty districts of South Korea for yourself, click the link in the description to get your copy of the Seoul Travel Guide 2026. See you in Part 2.